Talk about Nick Chubb, who finishes the RB8 in 2019, up against Joe Mixon, who finishes the RB13. We have a AFC North head-to-head debate here. I'll go first and talk about Nick Chubb. I'm the Browns homer, of course, so I'm a little biased here, but I'm taking Nick Chubb over Joe Mixon, for all the reasons that he showed us last season. I like Mixon for sure, but you look at Chubb. He finished at second in rushing yards with 1,494 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. Both guys, Mixon and Chubb, are about even in workload. With Kareem Hunt coming in, and I know this is going to be everybody's first kind of objection when we talk about Nick Chubb and his upside and his value in fantasy is, well, Kareem Hunt's going to be taking all of that volume away from him. In those games with Kareem Hunt, Chubb still had 17.7 attempts a game. So that's a 1 attempt or 2 attempt difference. And then we have Mixon getting 17.4 attempts per game and getting a slight bump in 3 to 4 receptions a game as well. But the main difference for me comes from the offenses. We have Chubb putting up 8 touchdowns to Mixon's 5. Chubb's efficiency at 5 yards per carry last season at 5.1 across his whole career is higher than Mixon's, who I think is about 4.2, something like that. Chubb also has a better O-line. According to Football Outsiders, the Browns are 10th in terms of offensive line to Cincinnati's 26th. So they have a lot of room to improve on that offensive line. Now, sure, Mixon makes more of his hay through the passing game, but far less yardage on the ground. I do believe in Joe Burrow. I do think he's going to be fantastic in the NFL, but I do think it is also unlikely just based on watching rookie quarterbacks adjust to the league. We know Zach Taylor is a pretty young, inexperienced head coach that he has. Just mentioned the bad O-line. It's hard for me to look at Mixon and say he can produce more than Chubb when Chubb's on an offense that can't get worse than last season in terms of the play calling. I'm expecting more goal line work. I'm expecting plenty of volume for Chubb and Kareem Hunt, continued efficiency on the ground. The odds to me that Mixon blows up are much lower when we just look at Bengals' range of outcomes. So I'm taking Nick Chubb almost more for just the stability and the floor there. Certainly I do think Mixon has his upside and will be a great fantasy option. But for me, you can't take anything away from what Chubb has done on the ground.
Yeah, that's a good case, Steph, and I hate to do this to you, but I am going to unravel everything you just said, or at least I'm going to try my best. I know, actually, I will give it to you. Chubb, the usage did stay fairly similar when Kareem Hunt came back, and that's the first thing everybody thinks about. That's the low-hanging fruit. And I honestly was surprised to see that the receiving output was very similar in 2019. Chubb actually had 1 more reception than Mixon. Mixon only had 9 more yards in the receiving game. So that was a shock to me. But you did say Chubb, the better offense. He had 8 touchdowns to Mixon's 5. Mixon actually also had 3 touchdowns receiving, and Chubb had 0. So overall touchdowns, they both had 8. And as far as the snaps and usage, Kareem Hunt, he did play alongside Chubb a lot, and the carries and the snap count didn't change dramatically. But to me, if you actually look at the fantasy production as a whole when Kareem Hunt came back, you just can't ignore the numbers. So let me lay it out. Weeks 1 through 9, Chubb was the running back 6, and that was 18.9 fantasy points a game. Weeks 10 through 17, he was running back 15, and he only had 13 fantasy points a game. So with Hunt active, he actually averaged 6 less fantasy points a game. He only had 1 less carry a game, but he had 2 less receptions. And in PPR and half PPR, that can be a big deal. When they both were on the field, Kareem Hunt had 3 touchdowns. Chubb only had 2. I do expect the run volume to be better in 2020. I expect the offense to be better under Stefanski. But I really think the Chubb-Hunt split does cap his upside, both on touchdowns and just receiving work. Those are the little things that can take you from a low-end RB1 to a guy who can finish as the fantasy football RB1. So I still have Chubb around that running back 12 range. But for me, I don't see Chubb as a guy who can finish as a top 3 running back in 2020, but I do see Joe Mixon as a guy who can finish there with his upside, and I think their floors are pretty similar. So Mixon actually, to me, had almost the opposite season of Chubb. He started slow and finished strong, where Chubb started really strong and still finished pretty strong, but not as strong. He slowed down a little bit. Mixon had over 1,000 yards in 2019 on the ground, 5 touchdowns on the ground. He had 287 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. He came in with super high expectations. He was the PPR running back 10 in 2018. And I remember through 7-8 weeks, any fantasy football outlet you would hear was saying, like, Mixon, you could almost not cut him, but if you could trade him for anything of value, trade him, but you might be stuck holding him because no one wanted him. I remember in the league we're in together, I could have probably offered, pennies on the dollar for Joe Mixon. I still didn't do it because through the first 7 weeks of the season, he was the running back 35 with 8.9 fantasy points per game. But over the final weeks of the season, weeks 8 through 17, he was the running back 6 with 18.1 fantasy points per game. So he finished incredibly strong. The Bengals offense improved dramatically throughout the year. Zach Taylor finally started to figure things out. You mentioned it, their O-line sucked last year. It was 26th in run blocking. So to me, Mixon finished, over those past several weeks with over 18 fantasy points a game, and he was a locked-in RB1. That offense is only going to continue to get better. They're going to draft Joe Burrow, most likely. He's going to elevate that offense. A.J. Green is going to help elevate that offense. I also think they address the O-line in the draft. I think a very possible scenario is to take Burrow in the first round and a top offensive lineman early in the second round to give Burrow that guy to kind of grow and develop within the league. So for me, I think the way Mixon was trending with that elite performance in the back half of the season is going to continue, and I think this Bengals team is going to be better. So for me, I want that upside with Mixon. I do see a range of outcomes. It's not a high range of outcomes. I don't think the percentage is high with McCaffrey and Barkley and some of these guys, but Mixon, there is a world where he finishes at the running back 1, and I just don't see that for Nick Chubb.
Hey, that's fair. And if you look at the bottom end of that range of outcomes, that's where I see his Mixon's a little bit more scary to me. What's more likely, that Joe Burrow is going to come in and just be the next Patrick Mahomes, in his first 8 games, and they're going to be fantastic? Maybe, but I don't see that as likely as something like a Daniel Jones type of situation or a Drew Lock type of situation where they show flashes. They also show, they make rookie mistakes. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting one nonetheless. I like both of these names in fantasy.